Hello, everyone, and welcome to this presentation. My name is Abdel Sumrein. I'm coming to you from the European Chemicals Agency, and I am the product manager of the EU Observatory for Nanomaterials. I'll be talking to you today about the public perception of nanomaterials by the regular EU citizens, and this will be presenting on the outcome of a study that we conducted at the EU ON in 2020. So, to start out with, I'll give you a rough outline of my presentation for today. So I'll start by telling you a little bit about the EU Observatory for Nanomaterials, what exactly is the observatory, why it was set up. I'll tell you a little bit about the goals of the observatory, what we really want to achieve with our work. And then from there, I'll launch straight into the study, that's the subject of today's talk, on how the EU citizen perceives nanomaterials. And this was a study that was performed and funded by the EU. I'll go ahead and tell you about why we did this particular study. I'll give you a bit of information about how we did it so you can understand that. And then I'll focus more on what are the conclusions and outcomes from this particular study. And finally, at the end, I'll have a bit of reflection about what this means for the EU Observatory for Nanomaterials. So let's get started with first talking about the EU Observatory for Nanomaterials. So a few years ago, there was a discussion ongoing in the public domain about how we communicate about nanomaterials. And there was the feeling, the perception that there is a limited amount of information available about nanomaterials in the public domain. And this lack of information, or the perception of lack of information, was creating, or there was a sense that this was creating a difference between what nanomaterials are and how the public actually views nanomaterials. So overall, there was a sense that there isn't enough information out there on in the public domain about nanomaterials. In order to address this situation, the European Commission came up with a number of initiatives. One of these is the EU Observatory for Nanomaterials, which got started in 2017 based on an agreement between ECHA and the Commission. So the Commission funds ECHA to create the EU Observatory for Nanomaterials. In addition to this observatory, the Commission also did a number of other actions. So they adopted a definition or a recommendation for a definition of a nanomaterial, so that whenever people are talking about nanomaterials, at least in a regulatory context, they are using the same language, the same terminology. And then finally, the Commission made some changes to the REACH regulation that included explicit requirements for companies that are making nanomaterials or importing nanomaterials, that they need to provide specific information about these substances under the REACH regulation for chemicals. So overall, these actions were aimed at improving the level of information out there on nanomaterial, and the EU on itself has the goal of improving the level of transparency and the level of availability of information to the public. And this basically functions just like a normal astronomical observatory would. An astronomical observatory aims at collecting information about the stars. You know, we can all look at the sky and see the stars at night, but really an observatory has a high-powered telescope that brings this information closer to us and makes it more easily accessible by the regular citizen. And this is what the EU Observatory on Nanomaterials aims to do. Now, how this goal will be achieved? Well, the whole question on transparency of nanomaterials can be seen like a jigsaw puzzle. There's already a lot of information out there from different sources. So there's information from EU-funded research projects on nanomaterials. There's information from different EU agencies that might be regulating nanomaterials, and from the European Commission as well as information from around the globe as well. But sometimes the picture is unclear because we don't have all the pieces of the information available to us. And so the EU aims to improve this picture by basically doing three things. One is to first collect the existing information that is out there in the public domain. And then once this information is collected, we look at the information, we analyze it, and we try to identify if there are certain important knowledge gaps, and we try to fill these knowledge gaps by doing studies. And what I will be talking to you about is an example of such a study that we did. And then we try to take this information that we collect, the studies that we perform, and we share this with the public in a way that is easy to access and easy to understand by the regular EU citizen. And of course, the EU is not working alone. So I mentioned already the initiatives that were done by the Commission in terms of a definition of nanomaterials and the changes to the REACH regulation. And we should see the EU as really complementing these other EU actions, not as a replacement for these actions. So from here on, I'll jump straight into our study. And the study is really aiming to address a simple question, which is how does the EU citizen really perceive nanomaterials? So let's start out by saying, well, why do we perform such a study? Well, as a starting point, we know that there are already today many products on the EU market that are using nanomaterials or nanotechnology. We can have nanomaterials in things as car tires, we can have them in cosmetics, we can have them in textiles, and slowly these are becoming really an integral part of our daily lives. At the same time, we have seen that there have been a number of studies done over the past years that show that even though nanomaterials are being put as products, as consumer products, there is in general a low level of awareness by the public about what nanomaterials are, what are their benefits for the EU citizen, and what are also the risks, and how are these risks and hazards assessed and controlled at a regulatory level. And there is the feeling or the concern that this lack of awareness can result in a certain level of mistrust of nanomaterials, or perhaps even fear of nanomaterials. And if the consumer becomes fearful or mistrustful, then this could have the impact that people might choose not to use nanomaterials, and then we might lose some of the benefits that these materials might have to offer for us. But also, on the other hand, that they would not be aware of how to use nanomaterials properly, of the hazards that are associated with these materials. So we conducted this study to try to understand really how does the public see nanomaterials, so that we can address any issues that might come out of it. And the kind of questions we wanted to ask were things like, first of all, how does the public see nanomaterials? Do they see them as hazardous? Do they see them as safe? Or do they not care either way? Do they not have a view either way? A second kind of question we were thinking about is, if a consumer, if you, I, go out to purchase a nanomaterial, um, purchase a product, and they know that this product contains a nanomaterial, so they're aware of the contents of the product. If they're aware of it, would they be more likely, or would they be less likely to say, I want to buy this product, or would they be neutral about this? And then we wanted to see, as a general rule, how these attitudes might correlate with certain factors. So, how they might correlate with demographic factors like age, like gender, or men and women, do they have a different perception of nanomaterials? And also, how do different EU citizens in different countries view these? There might be some differences there as well. So these are the kind of questions we wanted to address in this study. Now, let's think about how we did this particular study. So we conducted the study, like I mentioned earlier, in 2020, and the results were published in November of last year. So this is relatively fresh information now. The way we did the study was by a combination of literature searches, so finding what information is already out there, and then doing public surveys with regular EU citizens in different EU countries. So we did this work together with our contractor, Ecomol. And we started this out by first doing a literature survey. So the work looked at around 402 previous publications related to the topic. We collected the information there and analyzed it. And then this information was also used to create a new survey, which had 28 questions on it, addressing a variety of different topics that might be related to nanomaterials. And we ran this survey in 5 specific EU countries. These are Austria, Bulgaria, Finland, France, and Poland. And in each country, we had 1,000 respondents responding, so a total of 5,000 respondents overall. And these 5 countries were selected based on a variety of factors with the aim of them being representative for the EU as a whole, because we could not, in the scope of this study, run the study across all EU countries. But these countries were aimed to represent different kinds of populations, whether that's populations that came earlier to the EU or later to the EU, different levels of income, etc. So to give as accurate a picture of EU citizens as a whole. Now, let's start with some of the findings from this study, and I'll start with some general findings and then go into a bit more detail. So, first of all, the level of general awareness about nanomaterials by the EU citizens is relatively low. At the same time, we're seeing that the level of awareness is increasing, and we can know this because there have been previous studies done, and the methodology that we used in this study is comparable to those, so we can compare the results and see the level of awareness has been increasing over the years. Now, when we asked in this survey, how concerned are you about nanomaterials? Are you concerned or not? Around 25% of the respondents say we are concerned about nanomaterials in some way. Now, to put this into a little bit of context, we asked questions about how people feel about other kinds of technologies. So we see that this level of concern, so saying 25% are concerned, is similar to other technologies like computers, like social networks, like electronics. So that gives you an idea of what the level of concern is. It's roughly the same level of concern as the EU citizen has about using computers or social networks. But it is far less than some other technologies. So around 2/3 of the respondents said they were concerned about things like genetically modified organisms or global warming or plastic waste. So you can see a clear distinction between the level of concern that people have for nanomaterials. And then, importantly, around the same number of people, so around 25% of the respondents also say they have no distinct opinion about nanomaterials as a whole. And this lack of an opinion seems to be associated, based on the questions and responses we got, it seems to be associated with a lack of knowledge about the topic as a whole. So if they don't know much about the topic, they don't have an opinion. Now let's dive a little bit into consumer behavior. So we wanted to ask a question, if a consumer is buying a product, they know it has a nanomaterial, are they more or less likely to buy it? And again, here, a little bit of context is useful to have. So there is, first of all, a general trend in the public in the EU to be more aware of environmental issues and health and safety issues. And as this awareness has increased as a whole, the public has become more and more cautious when they are buying products as a general rule. They want to buy products that are safe. Now, when we asked most people who are buying a product for the first time, more than half of them say that they want to read the label, the information about this product. So that's a high portion of people. And we're talking about products in general. Also, a bit of useful context here is that the majority of respondents in the survey said they would be willing to pay more for a product that is guaranteed to be safer. So they were saying they're willing to pay somewhere between 1 to 20% more for a product that they feel is safer or that is guaranteed safer. Now, jumping into nanomaterials specifically, the consumers were saying when we asked them the question, if you're buying a product and you know it's nanomaterial, would you buy it or not? And the consumers in these 5 countries seem to be more cautious when they are buying a product and they know it has a nanomaterial. But importantly, this level of caution depends on the category of the product. So people are less concerned if they're buying something like a computer or a car product that has nanomaterials in it, but a lot more cautious when they're buying a product that might go into their body or on their body. So things like medicines, foods, cosmetics that might contain nanomaterials. And this in itself is not surprising. People tend to be more concerned in general about what they eat and the medicines they take as a whole. And an important finding in this is that the more the consumers know about nanomaterials, the less they are concerned. So as they are receiving more information, they feel a higher level of confidence, of safety, of trust in this product. And this is important because what this tells us is that there is a need in general to make consumers, to make the public aware of nanomaterials, of their safety, and there's an important role here for the EU to play. So going a bit into more detail with the information we collected, we can divide the respondents into 4 categories or 4 types of respondents. So the first group of these, around 19% of the respondents, is what we call enthusiasts. So these are individuals who have a generally positive attitude or a very positive attitude towards nanomaterials. And this group demographically is typically someone in the age of 40 to 49 years old, and they typically live in a bigger city and have a higher level of education, a university education in there. Now, the next group, and this is the biggest group of the respondents, is what we call tolerating. They have generally an open attitude and a tolerating attitude towards nanomaterials. But typically, this respondent is younger. They're a person younger than 29 years old, and they tend to be someone like a student, but also a person with university level education as well. The next group is very different from the first two. So the next group is what we call a fearing category, and this is a group that is explicitly rejecting or avoiding nanomaterials, and that's about 23% of the population. This group is demographically also different. They tend to be someone over 50 years of age and someone who has a level of education lower than a university education. It also interestingly seems to be that females are a bit more cautious than males. So there's more females in this group than males. And finally, the last group and the smallest group is a group that has no opinion. So this is around 12% of the respondents. And these are people who have no clear opinion or attitude about nanomaterials or their uses or their impacts. And demographically, this group is very similar to the fearing group, but the difference is that they tend to be a bit younger, so they are in the age group of 30 to 39 years old. Now, from this, we also asked the question from our respondents about who do you trust when you're looking for information about nanomaterials, and where do you go to look for information about nanomaterials? Because we wanted to know in order to be able to communicate better to the public. So first of all, about information sources. Actually, more than half the respondents said they feel equally informed about nanomaterials compared to other modern technologies. And now the main source of information for people are, not surprisingly, either the internet or television. But when people are actively going out and seeking information, they go towards the internet. However, most people, only about 1 in 5 respondents said they have specific websites or specific centralized sources that they go to for their information about nanomaterials. Now, if we think about the question, who do you trust to get information about nanomaterials? Well, first of all, we saw that the highest level of trust from the public is in scientists and research institutions, people in academia as a whole who are studying nanomaterials. And then closely following that is the national health authorities in the country in question. People trust that as a source of information. And very closely followed by that, there's a trust in EU authorities or agencies like the European Commission, like the European Chemicals Agency. Now, around 14% of the public say they have absolute trust in these authorities, and then around half of the respondents say they place some trust in these authorities. And overall, the level of trust in these seems to be also comparable to the level of trust that the public has in things like environmental organizations as well. However, we do see a clear difference in the trust level of trust in politicians and producers or distributors or products. So, in the respondents in this survey indicated they have generally a lower level or low level of trust in politicians or the manufacturers of these products that contain nanomaterials. Moving on from there, we wanted to see what are the kind of factors that might impact how the public sees nanomaterials. Are there certain demographic factors, for example, that might have an impact? And what we see is that the age of the respondent, the level of education, and surprisingly, religious belief are the three most important factors that impact the public's perception about nanomaterials. So, um, people who are older, have an age of over 50 years old, tend to be more cautious in general about nanomaterials. People who have a higher level of education seem to be more trusting of nanomaterials. And then people who have more religious beliefs seem to have a higher level of concern for nanomaterials. Now, in contrast, there have been studies in the past that are also suggesting or showing that the level of concern that the public has is driven not so much by demographics, so things like age or education or gender, but more by the personality type of the individual. So people who are cautious as a whole tend to be cautious about new technologies. So this is a different or a contrasting type of information that we found. Now, a very important thing that we found in the study is that a big portion, so around 87% of the public, say that they want to have information about nanomaterials in the products that they buy. Whether this be by some kind of a label on the product or some kind of a sign. And the desire to be informed is higher for things like products like cosmetics, like food, like medicine. So here, the public has a strong desire to be informed. But very importantly, this study was not really designed at exploring what kind of information should be there on such a label, and to assess that would really require a bit of further work. But nevertheless, it gives a strong signal that the public wishes to know about nanomaterials in the products that they purchase. So, okay, now this gives us a general idea of the results of this particular study, and it's time to think about what kind of conclusions we can take from this going forward. So, the one thing that clearly comes from this study is that having a higher level of awareness about nanomaterials is important for getting really the benefits and avoiding the risks of nanomaterials. We do see that consumers have a cautious attitude toward nanomaterials, but they're not overly concerned about nanomaterials. So they're cautious in the same way that they're cautious about other technologies like computers, like social networks, but not in the same way that they're concerned about things like asbestos or GMOs. So there's a level of concern, but not fear, let's say. An important piece of information there is that the people seem to have a good level of trust in the work that scientists do, as well as the work that national and EU institutions do. And this means that because there is a lot of work really done by these authorities on nanomaterials, there's also a need to communicate about the work that is done. And we see very clearly that the more available information is, the more accessible information is to the public about nanomaterials. It means that the public becomes more and more accepting of these technologies, more trusting. So this really gives a very strong signal that we need to continue to raise awareness to the general public about nanomaterials. We need to continue to collect information that is generated from a variety of sources, because indeed there is a lot of research that is being funded about the safety and markets of nanomaterials, and we need to put these together and make it accessible to the public. And this is exactly what the UN has been doing, and that what we hope to continue to do over the coming years in order to give to the public the information that they clearly say they want to have. And with this, I come to the very end of my presentation. I thank you for listening to this. And if there are any questions, I would be happy to answer them.